Picture this. A quiet woman walks into a military training facility. She's smaller than most recruits, speaks softly, and keeps to herself. The drill sergeants look at her and see an easy target. Fellow trainees whisper that she won't last a week. Even she begins to doubt herself. But what they don't know is that this woman carries a secret strength forged in the fires of survival. What they can't see is the steel beneath her gentle exterior. What they fail to understand is that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one nobody sees coming. In just seconds, everything they thought they knew about her would shatter. In one explosive moment, she would prove that the greatest mistake you can make is underestimating someone who has already survived the unthinkable. This is her story. This is how Maria Santos went from being the unit's target to becoming its most respected member. This is how she turned their doubt into her greatest weapon. Get ready to witness what happens when quiet strength meets loud intimidation. Get ready to see how quickly the tables can turn when someone refuses to remain a victim. The transformation begins now. Maria Santos stepped off the bus at Fort Braxton with a small duffel bag and a heart full of determination. The North Carolina sun beat down mercilessly as she joined the line of new recruits walking toward the processing center. At 5 feet 4 inches and barely 120 pounds, she looked like she had taken a wrong turn on her way to college orientation rather than military basic training. The other recruits towered over her. Most were young men with athletic builds who had played football in high school or spent years preparing for this moment. They walked with confidence, talking loudly about their expectations and goals. Maria remained quiet, observing everything around her with sharp brown eyes that missed nothing. She had not told anyone back home in Phoenix about her real reasons for enlisting. Her family thought she wanted to serve her country and earn money for college. Her few friends assumed she was trying to prove something to herself. They were not entirely wrong, but the truth ran much deeper than patriotism or personal growth. Maria carried secrets that had shaped every decision in her 22 years of life. She knew what it felt like to be powerless. She understood the weight of fear and the taste of desperation. Most importantly, she had learned that survival sometimes required becoming someone completely different from who the world expected you to be. The processing center buzzed with activity as drill sergeants barked orders and medical personnel moved recruits through various stations. Maria completed her paperwork efficiently, answered questions honestly, and followed directions without complaint. She noticed how some of the louder recruits were already attracting negative attention from staff. She made mental notes about everything she observed. During the medical examination, the doctor raised an eyebrow at her small frame. "Are you sure you're ready for this, young lady?" he asked while checking her reflexes. "Basic training is extremely demanding physically." "I'm ready, sir," Maria replied calmly. She had been preparing for this moment for 3 years, ever since she had made the decision to completely rebuild her life. The doctor did not need to know about the hours she spent running through the desert outside Phoenix, or the martial arts classes she had taken in secret, or the way she had systematically eliminated every weakness she could identify in herself. After processing, the recruits were assigned to barracks and given their initial gear. Maria found herself in a bay with 30 other women, most of whom seemed to know each other already or quickly formed groups based on shared backgrounds. She unpacked her few belongings methodically, arranging everything according to the regulations they had been given. "Hey, Tiny," called out Jessica Rodriguez from the bunk across the aisle. "You sure you're old enough to be here? You look like you should be in high school." Several other women laughed, but it was not mean-spirited. They were nervous too, and finding someone who looked less prepared than they felt probably provided some comfort. Maria smiled politely and continued organizing her space. "I'm Maria," she said simply. "Nice to meet everyone." "Where are you from, Maria?" asked another woman named Kate, who had mentioned earlier that she had been a college basketball player. "Phoenix," Maria answered. "Born and raised." "What made you decide to join up?" Kate continued, clearly trying to be friendly. Maria had practiced answering this question. I wanted to challenge myself and serve my country, she said. It was true, even if it was not the complete truth. That first evening, after dinner and orientation briefings, the women in Maria's base talked late into the night despite orders to sleep. They shared stories about their backgrounds, their motivations for joining, and their fears about the weeks ahead. Maria listened more than she spoke, filing away information about each person. Jessica had joined to escape a small town where she felt trapped. Kate wanted to become a military police officer. Sarah from Michigan hoped to gain skills that would help her support her family. Each woman had her own reasons, her own dreams, and her own fears. When the conversation turned to Maria, she kept her answers brief. I grew up in a rough neighborhood, she said. I learned early that you have to be strong to survive. Rough how? Jessica pressed. Like gang stuff. Just rough, Maria replied, closing the subject politely but firmly. The truth was that Maria had grown up in a house where fear lived in every room. Her father had been a man who used his size and temper to control everyone around him. He had never met a problem he could not solve with his fists, never encountered a person he could not intimidate into submission. For the first 18 years of her life, Maria had watched her mother shrink into herself, had seen her older brother leave home the moment he turned 18, had learned to become invisible whenever possible. She had been 17 when everything changed. Her father had been drinking more than usual that night, angry about losing his job at the construction company. Her mother had made the mistake of suggesting that maybe he should cut back on beer until he found new work. The sound of the slap had echoed through the small house like a gunshot. But this time, something different had happened. This time, Maria had not run to her room and hidden under the covers. This time, she had stepped between her parents and said the word that would change everything. Stop. Her father had looked at her with surprise that quickly turned to rage. What did you say to me, little girl? I said stop, Maria had repeated, her voice stronger than she felt. Stop hitting her. What happened next had lasted only minutes, but felt like hours. Her father had reached for her the way he had reached for her mother countless times before. But Maria had been taking self-defense classes in secret for 6 months, using money from her part-time job at a local restaurant. When his hand came toward her, she had moved without thinking. The techniques she had practiced had flowed together like a dance she had always known. She had grabbed his wrist, twisted his body, and used his own momentum to send him crashing into the kitchen table. The big man who had terrorized her family for years had ended up on the floor, staring up at his youngest child with shock and something that might have been fear. If you ever touch her again, Maria had said, standing over him, I will call the police. If you touch me, I will defend myself. This ends now. Her father had gotten up slowly, looked back and forth between Maria and her mother, and walked out of the house. He had never raised his hand to either of them again. In fact, he had barely spoken to Maria at all during the remaining months she lived at home. But that night had taught Maria something crucial about herself. She had discovered that she was not naturally weak or helpless. She had learned that size and intimidation only worked against people who allowed themselves to be intimidated. Most importantly, she had realized that she could transform herself into someone completely different from who others expected her to be. The years between that night and her arrival at Fort Braxton had been devoted to building on that revelation. She had finished high school while working 2 jobs and helping support her family. She had taken every martial art class she could afford, learning not just techniques, but philosophy and mental discipline. She had run endless miles through the desert, building endurance and mental toughness. She had also spent countless hours researching military training, reading about the psychological tactics used to break down recruits and rebuild them as soldiers. She knew what to expect, how to respond, and, most importantly, how to survive the process of becoming someone new. Now, lying in her narrow bunk at Fort Braxton, Maria listened to the breathing of 30 other women and thought about the weeks ahead. She knew that drill sergeants would try to find her breaking point. She knew that other recruits might see her as weak. She knew that every day would bring new challenges designed to reveal who she really was under pressure. What they would discover, she thought with quiet confidence, was that she had already been tested in ways that military training could not duplicate. They would learn that someone who had survived 18 years with an abusive father and then found the strength to stand up to him was not easily broken. The woman who had walked off that bus was not the same scared girl who had once hidden in her bedroom while violence erupted in the kitchen. That girl had died the night she chose to fight back. The person who had taken her place was someone who understood that true strength came not from size or anger, but from refusing to accept defeat. As sleep finally began to claim her, Maria smiled slightly. Tomorrow would bring the real beginning of basic training. Tomorrow, Drill Sergeant Morrison would get his first good look at his new recruits. Tomorrow, the real test would begin. She was ready for whatever came next. More than that, she was looking forward to showing everyone exactly what they had underestimated when they looked at the quiet woman with the small frame and gentle voice. The transformation they would witness would surprise them all, but none more than the drill sergeant who thought he had seen everything in his 15 years of breaking down recruits and building up soldiers. Maria Santos was about to prove him wrong. The alarm clock screamed at 4:30 in the morning, shattering the peace of the women's barracks like a bomb explosion. Before most recruits could fully open their eyes, Drill Sergeant Morrison was already moving through the bay like a hurricane, his voice booming commands that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. Move, move, move. You have exactly 4 minutes to be dressed, beds made, and standing at attention. 4 minutes starts now. Maria's eyes snapped open immediately. Unlike many of her bunkmates who groaned and stumbled in confusion, she rolled out of bed with fluid precision. Her feet hit the floor silently, and her hands moved with practiced efficiency through the routine she had memorized weeks before arriving. Uniform pieces appeared in the correct order. Boots were laced with military precision, and her bunk was transformed into a perfect rectangle of taut fabric and sharp corners. Around her, chaos erupted. Women crashed into each other while trying to dress, struggled with unfamiliar equipment, and fumbled with bed-making techniques they had only been shown once. The sound of Drill Sergeant Morrison's voice grew closer and angrier with each passing second. 3 minutes. I see women in this bay moving like they're underwater. This is not a spa vacation. This is the United States Army. Maria stood perfectly still at the foot of her bunk, uniform immaculate, posture straight as an iron rod. She watched without expression as other recruits continued to struggle around her. Jessica was still trying to figure out how to fold her blanket corners. Kate had her boots on the wrong feet. Sarah looked like she might start crying at any moment. 2 minutes. Santos. Front and center now. Maria stepped forward without hesitation, moving with controlled grace to stand directly in front of the drill sergeant. Morrison was exactly what central casting would order for a military intimidation expert. 6 feet 3 inches of solid muscle, a voice that could be heard 3 counties away, and eyes that seemed to see directly into a person's soul to identify their deepest weaknesses. He looked down at Maria with undisguised skepticism. She looked back up at him with calm attention, neither challenging nor submissive, simply present and ready for whatever came next. Well, Morrison said, circling her slowly like a predator examining potential prey. Look what we have here. Someone actually knows how to follow simple directions. Tell me, Santos, did your mommy pack your bags for you? Or did you manage that all by yourself? I pack my own bags, drill sergeant, Maria replied clearly, her voice carrying just enough volume to be heard distinctly without shouting. And I suppose you think that makes you special? That following basic instructions like a good little girl means you're ready to be a soldier? I think it means I can follow orders, drill sergeant. Morrison stopped directly in front of her, leaning down until his face was only inches from hers. The intimidation tactic was designed to break down personal space boundaries and trigger fight-or-flight responses. Most recruits either flinched backward or got angry and tried to stare him down, both of which were exactly the reactions he wanted. Maria did neither. She maintained eye contact without aggression, kept her breathing steady, and waited. Years of living with an unpredictable and violent father had taught her to read dangerous men, to remain calm under pressure, and to never show fear even when every instinct screamed at her to run. "You're awfully small, Santos," Morrison continued. "What makes you think someone your size can handle what we're going to put you through?" "Size is not the only measure of strength, drill sergeant." "Is that so?" Morrison's voice carried a note of amusement. "Well, we'll see about that, won't we? Because I have a feeling you're going to learn some hard lessons about the difference between confidence and ability." He turned his attention to the rest of the bay, where most women were finally approaching something resembling readiness. His voice exploded again, filling every corner of the space with military authority. "Time! Everyone who is not standing at perfect attention right now owes me 20 push-ups. Rodriguez, your bunk looks like a tornado hit it. Williams, those boots are not regulation. Thompson, if you can't figure out how to stand up straight, maybe you need to go back to kindergarten." The next hour passed in a blur of physical training, uniform inspections, and constant correction. Maria moved through each activity with quiet competence, drawing neither praise nor criticism from the drill staff. She completed every exercise in the required time, answered every question correctly, and maintained the exact level of respectful attention expected of recruits. Other women began to notice her performance. During a brief water break, Jessica leaned over and whispered, "How are you so good at this? It's like you've done it before." "I prepared," Maria answered simply. "Prepared how? Did you go to military school or something?" "I studied. I practiced. I got ready." Kate joined the conversation. "Seriously, Maria, you're making the rest of us look bad. Morrison hasn't yelled at you once." "He's yelled at everyone," Maria pointed out. "I just haven't given him a reason to yell at me specifically. How do you stay so calm when he gets in your face?" "I wanted to punch him when he did that intimidation thing to me." Maria considered her answer carefully. "Getting angry gives him power over you," she said. "Staying calm keeps the power with you." The women looked at her with new interest. This was not the advice they expected from someone who looked like she could be blown over by a strong wind. This was wisdom that came from somewhere deeper than textbook preparation. Their conversation was cut short as Morrison called them back to formation. The morning continued with weapons familiarization, first aid training, and a grueling obstacle course that left most recruits exhausted and frustrated. Maria completed each task efficiently, neither excelling dramatically nor falling behind. It was during lunch break that she first noticed Drill Sergeant Torres watching her with particular attention. Torres was Morrison's assistant, a compact man with intelligent eyes and a reputation for psychological warfare that was even more effective than Morrison's physical intimidation. "Santos," Torres called out as the women prepared to return their trays. "A word." Maria approached him with the same calm attention she showed Morrison. Torres studied her face for a moment, as if trying to solve a puzzle. "You're different from the others," he said quietly. "Most recruits are either terrified or trying too hard to prove themselves. You're just here, present, calm. Why is that?" "I'm here to learn, Drill Sergeant. Drama doesn't help with learning." "Interesting perspective. Tell me, Santos, what's your background? What did you do before you decided to join our little party?" "I worked in restaurants in Phoenix, Drill Sergeant. I helped support my family." "Restaurant work, huh? That where you learned to stay cool under pressure?" Maria met his eyes steadily. "That's where I learned that losing your temper doesn't solve problems, Drill Sergeant." Torres nodded slowly, still studying her. "I think you and I are going to have some interesting conversations in the weeks ahead, Santos. I have a feeling there's more to your story than restaurant work and family support. There's more to everyone's story, Drill Sergeant." "True, but most people wear their stories on their sleeves. You keep yours locked away. That makes me curious." As afternoon training began, Maria noticed that both Morrison and Torres were watching her more closely. They seemed to be testing her in subtle ways, giving her slightly more difficult tasks, placing her in positions where leadership or decision-making was required. During combat training, she was paired with Jennifer Walsh, a former college athlete who outweighed Maria by 40 pounds and stood 5 inches taller. The exercise was simple hand-to-hand combat basics, but Walsh seemed determined to prove that size mattered more than technique. "This is going to be easy," Walsh muttered as they faced off on the practice mat. "Sorry, Tiny, but someone needs to teach you about the real world." Maria said nothing, settling into a ready position that looked casual but was actually a perfectly balanced fighting stance. When Walsh charged forward with obvious strength but poor technique, Maria moved like water around her attack, redirecting the larger woman's momentum and sending her stumbling past. "Lucky break," Walsh said, resetting for another attempt. This time she was more careful, but her approach was still built on the assumption that superior size would eventually overcome any technical advantage Maria might possess. She was wrong. Over the course of their 10-minute session, Maria systematically demonstrated that leverage, timing, and technique could neutralize brute force. She never hurt Walsh, never humiliated her, but made it clear that the outcome of their encounters was entirely under Maria's control. Morrison and Torres watched the entire exchange with growing interest. When the session ended, Morrison called Maria aside. "Where did you learn to fight like that?" "Santos. I took some self-defense classes, drill sergeant." "Some self-defense classes." Morrison's tone suggested he found that explanation insufficient. "What you just demonstrated was way beyond basic self-defense. That was martial arts training. Advanced martial arts training. I want to be prepared for military training, drill sergeant." "Prepared." Morrison exchanged a glance with Torres. "Santos, I've been doing this for 15 years. I've seen every type of recruit you can imagine. Farm kids, city kids, college graduates, high school dropouts, athletes, computer nerds, and everything in between. But I have never seen someone prepare for basic training the way you apparently have." Maria remained silent, sensing that this was a moment requiring careful navigation. "The question," Torres added, "is why someone would prepare so thoroughly. What were you getting ready for, Santos? Because this level of preparation suggests you weren't just joining the army on a whim." "I wanted to succeed, drill sergeant. I didn't want to fail." "Failure?" Morrison nodded slowly. "You know what I think, Santos? I think you've seen failure before. I think you've seen weakness before. I think you decided a long time ago that you were never going to be weak again." His words hit closer to the truth than Maria had expected, but she kept her expression neutral. "I think everyone has to decide who they want to be, drill sergeant." "Indeed they do." Morrison stepped closer, but this time his proximity felt more like professional assessment than intimidation. "The thing is, Santos, most people make that decision and then hope for the best. You made that decision and then systematically turned yourself into the person you decided to be. That takes a special kind of determination. Or a special kind of motivation," Torres added quietly. The two drill sergeants looked at each other again, and Maria sensed that some kind of unspoken communication was passing between them. She had become more than just another recruit to process. She had become a mystery they wanted to solve. "We're going to be watching you very carefully, Santos," Morrison said finally. "I have a feeling the next few weeks are going to be very interesting indeed." As evening approached, and the recruits prepared for their second night at Fort Braxton, Maria reflected on the day's events. She had successfully navigated the initial challenges, but she could sense that the real tests were still coming. Morrison and Torres were smart, experienced, and now very interested in understanding what made her different from other recruits. The truth was that she had been preparing for this moment not just for months, but for years. Every mile she had run through the Phoenix Desert, every martial arts class she had attended, every book she had read about military psychology had been building toward these weeks of training. But more than that, every day she had survived in a house ruled by fear, and violence had been teaching her the mental skills she would need here. She had learned to think clearly under pressure, to remain calm in the face of aggression, to find strength when everything around her suggested she should be weak. The scared girl who had once hidden from her father's anger was gone forever. In her place stood someone who understood that true strength was not about size or volume or intimidation. True strength was about refusing to be broken, no matter what forces were arrayed against you. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests, and new opportunities to prove that they had underestimated what she was capable of. Maria looked forward to every single one. 3 weeks into basic training, the heat of the North Carolina summer had become a living thing that pressed down on the recruits like a weight they carried everywhere. The daily routine had settled into a punishing rhythm of physical training, classroom instruction, field exercises, and constant evaluation. Many recruits had already washed out, unable to handle the physical demands or psychological pressure. Maria had not only survived, but quietly distinguished herself as one of the most reliable performers in her unit. She completed every task on time, never complained, and had earned grudging respect from drill sergeants who had initially expected her to break within the first week. But it was on a sweltering Thursday afternoon that everything changed. The company was in the middle of advanced combat training when Drill Sergeant Morrison made an announcement that sent tension rippling through the assembled recruits. "Today we're going to have a special demonstration," Morrison said, his voice carrying the particular tone that meant someone was about to have a very bad day. "We're going to see how our training is progressing by having some of you participate in scenario-based exercises with members of our advanced training staff." Torres stepped forward, flanked by 3 other drill sergeants Maria had seen around the base but had never worked with directly. One of them immediately drew her attention. Sergeant First Class Davidson was a mountain of a man, easily 6 feet 5 inches, and built like a professional wrestler. He had a reputation among the recruits as someone who enjoyed making examples out of people who thought they were tougher than they actually were. "The scenario is simple," Morrison continued. "You're in a combat zone, you've become separated from your unit, and you encounter enemy forces. Your job is to survive long enough to either escape or neutralize the threat. Davidson here is going to play the role of an enemy combatant who has captured you and is attempting to extract information." Maria felt her stomach tighten. She had a strong suspicion about where this was heading. Santos, front and center. The other recruits turned to look at her with expressions ranging from sympathy to relief that they had not been chosen. Maria stepped forward without hesitation, but her mind was already working through the implications of what was about to happen. Davidson grinned as she approached, looking her up and down like a predator sizing up prey. Well, he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Looks like I get to work with the little princess today. This should be over quickly. The scenario begins now," Morrison announced. "Davidson, you have a captured enemy operative. Your job is to demonstrate proper interrogation resistance training. Santos, your job is to resist and escape if possible." Davidson's grin widened. He was clearly relishing the opportunity to manhandle someone in front of an audience, especially someone who looked as physically insignificant as Maria. What he did not know was that Maria had been preparing for exactly this kind of confrontation her entire life. "Turn around, hands behind your back," Davidson commanded, producing a set of training restraints designed to simulate capture conditions. Maria complied, allowing him to approach from behind. This was the moment she had been expecting since the day she arrived. This was the test that would reveal who she really was underneath the quiet exterior. As Davidson reached for her wrists, Maria's mind flashed back to every self-defense class she had ever taken, every technique she had practiced, every hour she had spent preparing for the moment when someone would try to use their size and strength to control her. The restraints clicked into place around her wrists, but they were loose enough to allow for some movement, as was standard for training exercises. Davidson grabbed her shoulder and spun her around to face him. "Now then, little lady," he said in a voice that carried undertones of enjoyment that made Maria's skin crawl. "Let's see how tough you really are when you can't hide behind regulations and supervision." He was standing too close, using his size to intimidate, pressing into her personal space in a way that was meant to trigger panic and submission. It was exactly the same tactic her father had used, the same approach that bullies and abusers used everywhere to break down their victims. The difference was that Maria was no longer a victim. "Asked you a question," Davidson continued, leaning down until his face was inches from hers. "Cat got your tongue? Or are you going to start crying for mommy?" Around them, the other recruits watched in uncomfortable silence. Some of the women looked genuinely concerned for Maria's safety, while others seemed relieved that they were not in her position. The drill sergeants observed with professional interest, evaluating both Davidson's interrogation technique and Maria's response. What happened next took less than 3 seconds, but will be talked about for the rest of basic training. Maria looked up at Davidson with the same calm expression she had maintained for weeks. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but carried clearly across the training area. "You're standing too close," she said. "What did you say?" Davidson demanded, pressing even closer in a display of dominance that had probably intimidated hundreds of recruits over the years. "I said you're standing too close," Maria repeated. "And you're about to learn why that's a mistake." Davidson's eyes widened slightly, perhaps recognizing that something unexpected was about to happen, but his ego would not allow him to step back in front of an audience. Instead, he reached out to grab her arm in a show of physical control. He never made contact. Maria's movement was so fast and fluid that most observers did not immediately understand what they had witnessed. Her hands, which had appeared securely restrained behind her back, suddenly appeared in front of her as she slipped the training cuffs with a technique that looked like magic to anyone who had never studied advanced escape methods. Her right hand intercepted Davidson's reaching arm. Her left hand found a pressure point on his neck, and her body moved in a way that used his own forward momentum against him. Davidson, all 240 pounds of him, found himself airborne for a split second before crashing to the ground with Maria standing over him, completely free of restraints. The entire sequence had been executed with such precision and control that Davidson was not seriously injured, just thoroughly shocked and completely immobilized. Maria had demonstrated that she could have hurt him badly if she had chosen to, but had instead simply neutralized the threat and established control of the situation. The training area fell completely silent. Every recruit, every drill sergeant, every staff member within sight stopped what they were doing and stared at the small woman standing calmly over the massive sergeant who had been completely outmaneuvered. Morrison broke the silence with a single word: "Fascinating." Torres stepped forward, his expression unreadable. Santos stepped back and explained what just happened. Maria moved away from Davidson, who was slowly getting to his feet with a look of absolute bewilderment on his face. She stood at attention and spoke in the same calm voice she always used. Drill Sergeant Torres, the subject attempted to use intimidation and physical proximity to establish psychological dominance. When that approach failed, he attempted to establish physical control through grabbing. I responded with appropriate defensive measures to neutralize the threat and escape restraint. Appropriate defensive measures, Torres repeated slowly. Santos, what you just did was not basic self-defense. That was advanced martial arts, possibly military combatives, executed with a level of skill that takes years to develop. Davidson had regained his feet and was staring at Maria with a mixture of embarrassment and grudging respect. "How the hell did you do that?" he demanded. "Those restraints were properly secured. The restraints were training equipment, Sergeant. They're designed to be escapable if you know the proper techniques. And you just happen to know the proper techniques?" "I prepared for basic training, Sergeant." Morrison stepped closer to the group, his expression serious. "Santos, I'm going to ask you one more time, and I want a complete answer. What exactly was your preparation for basic training?" Maria met his eyes steadily. She had known this moment would come eventually. She had hoped to complete training without having to reveal the full extent of her background, but that was no longer possible. "I spent 3 years studying military combatives, escape, and evasion techniques, psychological resistance training, and physical conditioning drill sergeant. I prepared for every aspect of military training that I could research and practice. 3 years, Torres said. You spent 3 years preparing for basic training. Why? This was the question Maria had been dreading, because answering it honestly meant revealing the parts of her story she preferred to keep private. But lying to drill sergeants was not an option, and she suspected they would keep pressing until they got the truth. Because I needed to be strong enough to never be helpless again, drill sergeant. The words hung in the air like a confession. Around them, the other recruits absorbed the implications of what they had just heard. This was not just about military preparation. This was about survival and transformation. Morrison and Torres exchanged another of their meaningful looks. They had suspected there was more to Maria's story, but this revelation put her in an entirely different category from typical recruits. Santos, Morrison said quietly, I think you and I need to have a private conversation after training today. Yes, drill sergeant. Davidson, who had been listening to the exchange with growing understanding, stepped forward. Santos, I owe you an apology. I thought I was dealing with a typical recruit who needed to be taught a lesson about military reality. I was wrong. No apology necessary, Sergeant. You were doing your job. My job doesn't include underestimating someone based on their size and appearance. That's a mistake that could get people killed in real combat situations. He paused, looking at her with new respect. What you did just now, that level of skill and control, that's the kind of thing that saves lives downrange. Word of the incident spread through the training company like wildfire. By evening chow, every recruit in the battalion had heard some version of the story about the small woman who had taken down Sergeant Davidson in a matter of seconds. The details grew more dramatic with each telling, but the core truth remained the same. Maria Santos was not what she appeared to be. The other women in her barracks looked at her with new eyes that evening. Jessica was the first to approach her directly. Maria, what you did today was incredible. But I have to ask, if you had those kinds of skills all along, why didn't you ever mention it? Maria considered her answer carefully. Because knowing how to defend yourself and being willing to use those skills are two different things. I hoped I would never need to demonstrate what I could do. But you were ready if you needed to, Kate observed. I've been ready for a long time, Maria acknowledged. Sarah, who had become friendlier over the weeks of training, sat down on her bunk facing Maria. Is it true what you told the drill sergeants? That you spent 3 years preparing for basic training? Yes. Why? I mean, why would someone spend 3 years preparing for something that lasts a few months? Maria was quiet for a long moment, thinking about how much truth she was willing to share. These women had become her friends, and they deserved honesty, but some stories were harder to tell than others. Because I grew up in a situation where being weak meant being hurt, she said finally. I decided that I would never be weak again, no matter what that required. The barracks fell silent as the implications of her words sank in. These women were smart enough to understand what kind of childhood would drive someone to spend years systematically rebuilding themselves into a completely different person. I'm sorry you went through that, Jessica said quietly. But I'm glad you did what you did today. Davidson was enjoying himself way too much, and someone needed to show him that size isn't everything. More than that, Kate added, you showed all of us something important. You showed us that we don't have to accept being intimidated just because someone is bigger or louder or thinks they have more authority. Maria nodded, appreciating their understanding. That's exactly right. The most dangerous thing anyone can do is underestimate what someone is capable of when they refuse to be a victim. As lights out approached, Maria reflected on the day's events. The demonstration had revealed more about herself than she had planned, but it had also established something important. She was no longer just another recruit trying to survive basic training. She had shown that she was someone who had already survived much worse than anything the military could devise. The test with Davidson had been just the beginning. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to prove what she was made of, and new chances to show that the quiet woman with the gentle voice was far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. But tonight, for the first time since arriving at Fort Braxton, Maria felt like she could finally stop pretending to be less than she was. The mask had been removed, and everyone could see the warrior she had worked so hard to become. The transformation was complete. Now came the real test of putting her skills to use in service of something larger than just her own survival. The private meeting with Morrison and Torres took place in a small office that smelled of coffee and military regulation furniture polish. Maria sat perfectly upright in a standard-issue chair, while the two drill sergeants reviewed what appeared to be her personnel file and several additional documents she did not recognize. "Santos," Morrison began, closing the folder and looking directly at her, "we've been doing some research into your background since yesterday's demonstration. What we found raises some interesting questions." Torres leaned forward slightly. "According to your intake forms, you worked in restaurants and helped support your family. That's true as far as it goes, but it's not the complete picture, is it?" Maria kept her expression neutral. "I answered all questions on my intake forms honestly, drill sergeant." "Yes, you did, but you answered them minimally. There's a difference between lying and not volunteering additional information." Morrison opened another folder. "We made some phone calls to Phoenix. Talked to people who knew you before you enlisted." A chill ran down Maria's spine. She had hoped her past would remain private, but she should have realized that military intelligence gathering was more thorough than civilian background checks. "Your high school counselor remembers you well," Torres continued. "Straight a student who worked 2 jobs and still found time for extracurricular activities. She mentioned that you underwent a remarkable transformation during your senior year. Went from being quiet and withdrawn to confident and focused. She also mentioned some rumors about martial arts training and self-defense classes. Your former manager at Casa Grande restaurant had some interesting things to say, too," Morrison added. "Apparently, there was an incident about 2 years ago where you stopped an attempted robbery. 3 armed men tried to hold up the place during your shift. According to witnesses, you disarmed 2 of them and held all 3 until police arrived." Maria had hoped that incident would not surface. It had been a matter of protecting her coworkers and customers, nothing more. But she could see how it would look to military investigators trying to understand her background. "The police report makes for fascinating reading," Torres said, consulting another document. "The arresting officers noted that the suspects had been subdued using what appeared to be professional-level defensive tactics. They also noted that you declined all media interviews and refused to be called a hero." "I was protecting people I cared about," Maria said simply. "There was nothing heroic about it." "That's an interesting perspective," Morrison observed. "Most people would consider stopping an armed robbery to be pretty heroic, but you saw it as just doing what needed to be done." "Why do you think that is, Santos?" Torres asked. "Why do you minimize your own actions?" Maria was quiet for a moment, recognizing that this conversation was heading toward territory she preferred to avoid. But these men were experienced at reading people, and lying would only make things worse. "Because calling yourself a hero for doing what anyone should do in that situation seems wrong," she said. "Heroes are people who sacrifice for others. I was just someone who refused to let bad things happen to good people." "Refused to let bad things happen," Morrison repeated slowly. "That's a very specific way to phrase it. It sounds like you've had experience with bad things happening." "Everyone has experience with bad things happening, drill sergeant." "True, but not everyone responds to that experience by spending 3 years systematically training themselves to prevent it from happening again." Torres set down his papers and leaned back in his chair. "Santos, we're going to ask you directly. What happened to you that motivated this level of preparation?" The question hung in the air between them like a challenge. Maria understood that this moment would determine how the rest of her military career unfolded. These men were offering her the choice between continuing to hide her past or trusting them with the truth. She took a deep breath and made her decision. "I grew up in a house where my father used violence to control everyone around him. He hit my mother regularly, intimidated my brother until he left home, and made it clear that anyone who challenged him would face consequences. I lived with that for 18 years. The two drill sergeants listened without interruption, their expressions professional but attentive. When I was 17, he hit my mother particularly badly one night. I decided that I couldn't watch it happen anymore, so I stepped in and told him to stop. Maria's voice remained steady, but she could feel the weight of the memory. He came at me the same way he had come at her hundreds of times before. But I had been taking self-defense classes in secret, and when he reached for me, I defended myself. What happened? Morrison asked quietly. I put him on the floor and told him that if he ever touched her again, there would be consequences. He never hit either of us after that night. But that wasn't the end of it, Torres observed. That was the beginning of your preparation. That night showed me two things. First, that I was not naturally helpless like I had always believed. Second, that there were probably other people in situations like mine who needed someone willing to stand up for them. Maria met their eyes steadily. I decided that I would become someone who could protect people who couldn't protect themselves. Morrison nodded slowly. So you spent 3 years turning yourself into that person. I spent 3 years learning everything I could about combat, survival, psychology, and leadership. I prepared for military service because I knew that was where I could make the biggest difference. And the restaurant incident? Torres asked, was exactly what I had been preparing for. 3 men decided to threaten people I cared about. I stopped them. The room fell silent for several minutes as Morrison and Torres absorbed what they had heard. Finally, Morrison spoke. Santos, in 15 years of training recruits, I have never encountered someone with your combination of skills, motivation, and background. You're not just prepared for military service. You're prepared for special operations. Special operations? Maria asked, genuinely surprised. What you demonstrated yesterday was not just advanced self-defense, Torres explained. It was special forces level combatives, executed with the kind of calm control that usually takes years of combat experience to develop. Combined with your psychological resistance to intimidation and your obvious intelligence, you have the profile of someone who should be in much more advanced training. Morrison opened a different folder. We've been authorized to offer you an opportunity, Santos. There's a program for exceptional recruits that would fast-track you through advanced training and put you in position for specialized assignments. What kind of specialized assignments? The kind where being underestimated is actually an advantage, Torres said with a slight smile. The kind where someone who looks harmless but has your skill set could accomplish missions that traditional operators couldn't even attempt. Maria considered this unexpected development. She had enlisted with the goal of serving her country and developing her capabilities further, but she had not imagined opportunities like this would be available. What would this involve? Advanced combat training, specialized weapons systems, intelligence gathering techniques, foreign language instruction, and eventually assignments that we can't discuss in detail until you've completed security clearance procedures. Morrison's expression became serious. But I want to be clear about something, Santos. This path is significantly more dangerous than standard military service. You would be taking on missions where the margin for error is essentially zero. It's also significantly more impactful, Torres added. If you're serious about protecting people who can't protect themselves, this program would give you capabilities that most people can only imagine. Maria thought about the offer for several minutes. This was far beyond what she had expected from military service, but it was also exactly the kind of opportunity she had been unconsciously preparing for her entire life. If I accept this offer, what happens to my current training unit? You would complete basic training with your current company, Morrison explained. Your fellow recruits don't need to know about this conversation or any future opportunities. As far as they're concerned, you're just another soldier finishing basic training. But after graduation, you would report to a different facility for evaluation and advanced training. If you successfully complete that program, you would be assigned to a unit that specializes in the kind of missions we've discussed. Torres leaned forward. Santos, I want you to understand something. We're not offering you this opportunity just because of what happened yesterday. We're offering it because of who you've shown yourself to be over the past 3 weeks. Your performance has been exceptional in every measurable category, and your psychological profile indicates someone who can handle extreme pressure while maintaining moral clarity. Moral clarity. The ability to make difficult decisions under pressure while maintaining a clear sense of right and wrong, Morrison clarified. It's rarer than you might think, especially in people with advanced combat capabilities. Maria considered everything they had told her. This was the path that could lead to the kind of impact she had dreamed about when she first decided to transform herself. But it was also a commitment to a life that would be fundamentally different from anything she had previously imagined. How long do I have to decide? You have until graduation to give us a final answer, Torres said. But I will tell you that opportunities like this don't come along often. We're making this offer because we believe you have the potential to make a significant difference in the world. A significant difference in protecting people who can't protect themselves, Morrison added, recognizing that this argument would resonate most strongly with her motivation. As Maria walked back to the barracks that evening, her mind raced with the implications of what she had learned. The quiet girl who had once hidden from her father's anger had become someone that military special operations wanted to recruit. The transformation that had begun in her family's kitchen had led to opportunities she never could have imagined. But more than that, she realized that everything she had experienced, from her father's abuse to her years of preparation to her performance at basic training, had been leading toward this moment. She had been unconsciously preparing for exactly this kind of service her entire life. The question now was whether she was ready to fully commit to becoming the person that her experiences had been shaping her to be. The scared girl was long gone, replaced by someone who understood that true strength came from using your capabilities to protect others. By the time she reached her bunk, Maria knew what her answer would be. She just needed to complete basic training and prove to herself one final time that she was ready for whatever came next. The transformation that had begun with standing up to her father was about to enter its next phase. And this time, she would have the full resources of the United States military behind her mission of protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. The quiet warrior was about to become something much more dangerous than anyone had yet imagined. Graduation day at Fort Braxton dawned clear and hot, with the kind of humidity that made dress uniforms stick to skin within minutes of stepping outside. Maria stood in formation with her fellow recruits, all of them transformed from the uncertain civilians who had arrived 8 weeks earlier into disciplined soldiers ready to serve their country. The ceremony itself was traditional military pageantry, with speeches from officers, presentations of awards, and the formal recognition of those who had excelled during training. Maria received several commendations for outstanding performance, but she noticed that Morrison and Torres kept the focus on standard achievements rather than mentioning her specialized capabilities. After the formal ceremony, families and friends mingled with new graduates in a celebration that felt both joyful and bittersweet. For many recruits, this was the beginning of military careers that would take them to bases around the world. For others, it was the completion of a commitment that would return them to civilian life with new skills and perspectives. Maria's family had made the trip from Phoenix for graduation. Her mother looked proud, but worried, still uncertain about her daughter's decision to join the military. Her older brother Carlos had come as well, expressing amazement at the confident young woman his little sister had become. "You look different," Carlos observed as they walked around the base together. "Not just the uniform, but something else. You seem stronger," Maria suggested. "More sure of yourself. Like you know exactly who you are and where you're going." "I do know where I'm going," Maria replied. "I just can't tell you all the details yet." Her mother overheard this comment and looked concerned. "What do you mean you can't tell us the details? Are you being sent somewhere dangerous?" "Mom, all military service has some element of risk, but I'm being offered opportunities to do work that really matters. Work that could make a difference in the world." "What kind of work?" Maria chose her words carefully. "The kind that uses all the skills I've been developing." the kind that helps protect people who need protecting. Carlos studied his sister's face with the attention of someone who had known her all her life. This is about more than just serving your country, isn't it? This is about what happened with Dad. Maria met his eyes steadily. Everything I've done since that night has been about what happened with Dad. But not in the way you might think. What do you mean? I mean, that night taught me something important about myself. It taught me that I don't have to accept being powerless. It taught me that someone needs to stand up for people who can't stand up for themselves. Their mother listened to this exchange with growing understanding. So this is your way of making sure other people don't have to go through what we went through. In part, yes, but it's bigger than that now. There are people all over the world who need someone willing to stand between them and those who would hurt them. I want to be that someone. After her family left for Phoenix, Maria reported to Morrison's office for her final meeting before departure. Torres was there as well, along with a woman in civilian clothes who introduced herself only as Agent Parker. Santos, Morrison began. Have you made a decision about the opportunity we discussed? Yes, Drill Sergeant. I accept. Excellent, Agent Parker said, speaking for the first time. We'll need to discuss some details about your next assignment. Over the following hour, Maria learned that she would be reporting to a facility in Virginia for evaluation and advanced training. The program would last 6 months and would determine whether she had the capabilities for the kind of specialized missions they had in mind. I want to be very clear about something, Parker said as the meeting concluded. What we're offering you is not just advanced military training. We're offering you the chance to become part of something that operates in the shadows, protecting national security in ways that most people will never know about. I understand. Do you? Because once you walk through the doors at the facility in Virginia, there's no going back to regular military service. You'll be committed to a path that will change everything about how you see the world and your role in it. Maria thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. From a scared girl hiding in her bedroom to someone that military special operations wanted to recruit. From powerless victim to someone who could neutralize trained combat instructors in seconds. From someone who accepted abuse to someone who devoted her life to preventing it. Agent Parker, I've been walking toward this moment my entire life. I'm ready. 2 weeks later, Maria found herself standing in front of a nondescript building in rural Virginia, carrying a single duffel bag and orders that told her almost nothing about what to expect. The facility looked like a corporate training center, complete with manicured lawns and modern architecture that revealed nothing about its true purpose. The woman who greeted her at the entrance was about 40 years old, physically fit, and carried herself with the kind of quiet confidence Maria had learned to recognize in truly dangerous people. Maria Santos? The woman asked. Yes, ma'am. I am Commander Walsh. Welcome to your new life. The next 6 months would prove to be more challenging than anything Maria had experienced, including basic training. She learned advanced combat techniques from instructors who had served in special operations units around the world. She studied foreign languages, intelligence gathering methods, and psychological operations. She trained with weapon systems that most military personnel never saw and practiced infiltration techniques in environments designed to simulate real-world missions. But perhaps most importantly, she learned about the kinds of threats that existed in the world that required unconventional responses. Human trafficking networks that operated across international borders. Terrorist organizations that recruited vulnerable young people. Criminal enterprises that preyed on those who had no one to protect them. The work we do, Commander Walsh explained during one of their regular evaluation sessions, is about intervening in situations where traditional military or law enforcement approaches won't work. We need people who can operate independently, think creatively under pressure, and maintain moral clarity even in morally ambiguous situations. How do you maintain moral clarity in morally ambiguous situations? Maria asked. By never forgetting why you're doing the work in the first place. By remembering that every mission, no matter how complex, ultimately comes down to protecting innocent people from those who would harm them. Maria excelled in every aspect of the training program. Her instructors noted her exceptional ability to remain calm under extreme pressure, her intuitive understanding of human psychology, and her remarkable skill at appearing harmless while being extremely dangerous. "You have a gift, Santos," one instructor told her after a particularly challenging exercise. "You can make people underestimate you without even trying. That's an incredibly valuable asset in our line of work." How so? Because most threats we deal with are confident, aggressive, and used to intimidating people into submission. They don't know how to respond to someone who appears vulnerable, but is actually the most dangerous person in the room. As graduation from the program approached, Maria received her first assignment. She would be part of a small team tasked with infiltrating an international human trafficking network that had been operating with impunity for years. Her role would be to pose as a potential victim while gathering intelligence and identifying key players in the organization. "This mission will use every skill you've developed," Commander Walsh explained during the briefing. "Your martial arts training, your psychological resilience, your ability to blend in and appear harmless. But most importantly, it will test your commitment to protecting people who can't protect themselves." Maria thought about the scared women and children who were trapped in situations similar to what her childhood had been, except with no hope of escape or rescue. She thought about her own journey from powerlessness to capability and about the responsibility that came with having the skills to make a difference. "I'm ready," she said simply. "I believe you are. But, Santos, I want you to remember something. The girl who stood up to her abusive father in a Phoenix kitchen has become someone who can stand up to international criminal organizations. That transformation didn't happen by accident. It happened because you refused to accept powerlessness and dedicated yourself to becoming strong enough to protect others." On her final evening at the facility, Maria walked the grounds alone, reflecting on the path that had brought her here. Less than a year ago, she had been working in a restaurant and dreaming of something more meaningful. Now she was about to embark on missions that would take her around the world and put her skills to use protecting people who had no other hope. The scared girl who had once hidden from violence was gone forever, replaced by someone who had dedicated her life to ensuring that others would never have to experience that kind of helplessness. The transformation was complete, but the real work was just beginning. As she prepared for her first mission, Maria thought about all the people who had underestimated her over the years. Her father, who had learned too late that size and intimidation meant nothing against someone who refused to be intimidated. Sergeant Davidson, who had discovered that assumptions about weakness could be dangerous mistakes. Even her own family, who still saw her as the quiet girl they had always known rather than the warrior she had become. But the greatest transformation was not in how others saw her. It was in how she saw herself. She was no longer someone who hoped to avoid violence and conflict. She was someone who actively sought out the places where innocent people needed protection, regardless of the personal cost. The quiet girl from Phoenix was gone. In her place stood someone who understood that true strength was not about overpowering others, but about using your capabilities to ensure that the powerless would never stand alone. Maria Santos had become exactly who she had set out to be, someone who could stand between the innocent and those who would harm them, someone who turned being underestimated into a weapon for justice, and someone who proved every day that the most dangerous person in any room was often the one nobody saw coming. The transformation was complete. The mission was just beginning. And somewhere in the world, people who had given up hope were about to discover that someone was coming to help them, someone who understood exactly what it meant to be powerless and had dedicated her life to ensuring that no one would remain that way. They had underestimated her, and that mistake would change everything.